The Pentagon retired this aircraft as hopelessly obsolete. Then, it secretly sent it back to war. Nearly half a century separated the OV-10 Bronco's first combat mission from its classified deployment against ISIS. While modern jet aircraft cost staggering sums, the small twin-boom veteran returned to the battlefield and delivered results the United States military preferred not to publicize. Why did an aircraft once dismissed by senior commanders become necessary again? How did two stubborn Marine Corps majors challenge the Pentagon and build the model of a future combat aircraft inside an ordinary garage? Why did the Bronco's greatest advantage nearly become its final weakness? And what forced the United States military to pull retired aircraft back out of the past decades later? Watch this video to the end. You will discover why the OV-10 Bronco was repeatedly declared unnecessary, which vital combat role the Pentagon never managed to replace completely, and how an aging propeller-driven aircraft proved its value in a 21st century war. The Pentagon was preparing for the wrong war. While American generals demanded faster and more expensive jet fighters, two Marine Corps majors were openly pointing to an uncomfortable truth. Magnificent aircraft designed for a nuclear confrontation could be nearly useless in the wars American troops were actually going to fight. Their names were William Beckett and Norton Prentice Rice. Most of his fellow Marines knew Rice simply as KP. He once described his full name as "great for a congressman, but terrible for a Marine." Behind the joke stood an officer who was willing to challenge his superiors and who understood how far official military doctrine had drifted from battlefield reality. Beckett and Rice had known each other for years. In 1949, they had flown Corsairs together in the same squadron. They watched military aviation change, piston-powered aircraft give way to jets, and raw speed become something close to a religion inside the Pentagon. This concerns the period aviators called the boom and zoom era. An aircraft was expected to climb rapidly, attack at tremendous speed, and escape before the enemy could respond. The higher it flew, the more powerful its engine, and the more advanced its missiles, the more modern it appeared. But who had decided that every future war would require such a machine? American strategists were preparing for a massive confrontation with the Soviet Union. They imagined high-altitude interceptions over Europe, supersonic attacks, and an exchange of nuclear strikes. Expensive fighters, elaborate guidance systems, and exotic missiles were developed for that nightmare. It all looked impressive on paper, but there was one problem that the Pentagon preferred not to discuss. Real conflicts were already erupting far from the carefully drawn battle lines of Europe. They were spreading through the jungles, deserts, and mountain regions of Asia and Africa. There were no perfect airfields, no stable front lines, and no enemy willing to fight according to an American operations manual. This concerns the so-called limited wars, dirty, confusing conflicts that offered little room for glamorous supersonic aircraft. A jet fighter could cross the battlefield in seconds, but could its pilot understand what was happening below? Could he distinguish enemy troops from friendly soldiers when the ground had become a blur? What value did tremendous speed have if the pilot could not clearly see the target? Beckett and Rice wanted an aircraft that seemed almost unacceptable by the standards of the jet age. It had to be faster than a helicopter, yet slow enough to remain over the battlefield for hours. It had to be rugged enough to land on an unprepared strip, a damaged runway, or an ordinary road. And it had to be cheap enough to operate alongside forward troops instead of from a massive air base hundreds of miles away. They wanted something simple enough to repair under field conditions, something capable of using weapons and ammunition available to ground forces rather than relying entirely on complicated Air Force systems. Its wings also had to be narrow enough for the aircraft to operate from a small clearing and, if necessary, pass between the trees. This concerns far more than a lighter fighter. The two majors were proposing a reconnaissance aircraft, forward controller, transport, and attack platform combined in a single machine. It would watch the battlefield, remain close to the troops, and open fire when support was needed immediately. To the Pentagon, the proposal bordered on an insult. Military leaders wanted aircraft that flew faster, higher, and carried increasingly complex technology. Beckett and Rice demanded something slower, smaller, simpler, and cheaper. It was almost the exact opposite of everything the Pentagon believed a modern combat aircraft should be. The Pentagon refused to build the aircraft ground troops actually needed. So, two Marine Corps majors decided to bypass the entire military system. William Beckett and Norton Rice were finished trying to persuade senior officers with reports and conversations. If the command would not seriously examine their proposal, they would build a full-sized version and place the answer directly in front of them. The decision bordered on open defiance. The two officers had no aircraft factory, no large engineering department, and no multi-million-dollar government contract. They had combat experience, a clear set of requirements, and an ordinary garage belonging to Rice in California. That garage became the birthplace of an aircraft that did not yet exist on any official drawing board. Beckett and Rice decided to construct a full-scale mock-up so the Pentagon could no longer dismiss the proposal as another unrealistic idea. They wanted officials to see its dimensions, cockpit arrangement, cargo space, engines, and unusual tail with their own eyes. This concerns a machine that was being created not because the military system supported it, but because two officers refused to accept the system's answer. Rice referred to that bureaucracy simply and contemptuously as the system. A written proposal could disappear into an archive, a committee could delay a decision, and another study could bury the idea for years. The mock-up was built from fiberglass. Its wings had to be left outside the project because the garage was not large enough to contain the complete aircraft. The detail was almost scandalous. A potential American combat aircraft was taking shape not inside a guarded experimental facility, but in a private garage that did not even have enough room for its wings. Beckett and Rice were not trying to produce an elegant exhibition model. They were testing the position of the crew, cargo compartment, engines, and tail surfaces. Every part of the design served the same demand. The aircraft had to operate beside forward troops without depending on a large and complicated airbase. This concerns the narrow central section of the proposed aircraft. Instead of using a wide conventional fuselage, the officers designed a slim crew compartment with two tandem seats. One crew member sat in front and the second directly behind him, reducing the aircraft's width while preserving the capabilities of a two-man crew. A small cargo compartment was positioned behind the seats. It could carry equipment, ammunition, stretchers, or several passengers. The aircraft was not intended to serve only as an observer. It could deliver supplies, evacuate personnel, transport a small team, or support ground troops with its own weapons. The design did not have a conventional tail. Two long structural booms extended backward on either side of the narrow cockpit and were joined at the rear by a horizontal stabilizer. The resulting twin-boom configuration looked unusual, but it kept the central section clear and helped provide the crew with a broad field of view. The most provocative feature was the enormous transparent canopy. It was wider than the fuselage beneath it and appeared, as one description put it, like a greenhouse crouched on top of a pencil. Such a shape might have looked ridiculous on a high-speed fighter, but on a battlefield observation aircraft, it offered the crew its most important weapon, unrestricted visibility. This concerns the fundamental disagreement between the two majors and the Pentagon. Senior commanders were increasingly treating the pilot as an operator who watched instruments, radar displays, and missile sites. Beckett and Rice argued that in a limited war, the crew first had to watch the ground, roads, villages, boats, vehicle tracks, and the movement of small enemy units. 2 turboprop engines were mounted on the side booms rather than on the central fuselage. This arrangement preserved room for the cockpit and cargo compartment while giving the aircraft the reliability demanded for low-altitude operations. If one engine was damaged, the second could provide the crew with a chance to remain airborne. The full-scale mock-up standing inside Rice's garage resembled no fashionable supersonic fighter, helicopter, or conventional transport aircraft. It had a narrow central cockpit, 2 tandem seats, a small cargo compartment, twin tail booms, and an enormous transparent canopy. Its 2 turboprop engines were mounted on the booms. The Pentagon looked at the proposed aircraft and delivered its verdict almost immediately. There was nothing elegant, expensive, or genuinely intimidating about it. Beside the sleek new generation of jet fighters, the twin-boom machine from a California garage looked like a technical mistake that had arrived in the wrong era. It was not supersonic. It could not climb into the stratosphere to intercept Soviet bombers. It carried no enormous bomb load and promised no spectacular speed records for senior commanders. The aircraft looked exactly like what it was: a strange design created by 2 stubborn officers outside the approved system. This concerns an era in which the appearance of a military aircraft was becoming confused with its combat value. A pointed nose, swept wings, afterburning engines, and advanced missiles represented the future. Straight wings, propellers, and an oversized transparent canopy appeared to belong to a chapter aviation had already closed. The Pentagon had little interest in spending money on an aircraft that seemed slower, simpler, and weaker than machines already entering service. The military wanted platforms designed for a major war, capable of intercepting targets at extreme altitude and striking deep inside enemy territory. The proposal from Beckett and Rice failed to satisfy almost every fashionable requirement. But the 2 majors understood something the men inside the Pentagon refused to acknowledge. Tremendous speed was useless if the pilot could not clearly examine the ground. A massive bomb load became dangerous when enemy fighters were positioned close to friendly troops. And the most advanced aircraft in the world became an expensive piece of metal if it required a perfect runway and an army of technicians. This concerns the central dispute surrounding the project. The Pentagon judged an aircraft by its performance in a global confrontation between superpowers. Beckett and Rice judged it by a much simpler question: could it reach a Marine platoon under fire in the jungle and remain overhead long enough to make a difference? The rejection did not force Beckett to surrender. Instead, he made a decision that could have ended his career in the Marine Corps. He retired from military service and carried the fight for the aircraft beyond the walls of the Pentagon. Beckett accepted a position at North American Aviation. This was not an attempt to find a comfortable civilian job. He intended to promote the concept from inside the aviation industry, where it could gain access to engineers, manufacturing facilities, and future military competitions. This concerns the personal price Beckett paid for his conviction. He abandoned a familiar military career for an aircraft that senior officials did not even regard as a serious combat platform. There was no guarantee that the gamble would succeed. The proposal could be canceled, the garage mock-up forgotten, and Beckett remembered only as the officer who lost his argument with the system. Then reality began moving faster than American military doctrine. While the Pentagon prepared for a massive war over Europe, the United States was becoming increasingly involved in Southeast Asia. Advisors, equipment, and aviation units were being sent to Vietnam, where the enemy had no intention of fighting, according to an American operations manual. The Vietnamese jungle showed no respect for elegant theories. Small armed groups disappeared beneath dense vegetation, moved along narrow trails, and operated close to villages. The front line shifted constantly, while distinguishing enemy forces, Allied troops, and civilians from the cockpit of a fast-moving jet was extraordinarily difficult. This concerns precisely the kind of war Beckett and Rice had warned about. Ground troops needed an aircraft that could remain nearby for hours, detect small movements, operate from short and primitive airstrips, and attack without waiting for a large strike formation. The American arsenal contained no aircraft designed to perform all those tasks together. By 1963, the conclusion was becoming impossible to conceal. Supersonic speed could not solve every battlefield problem, and sophisticated missiles could not replace a crew carefully watching the ground. The aircraft, once dismissed as a garage-built curiosity, was beginning to look like an answer to a genuine military emergency. The expanding jungle war in Vietnam had exposed an uncomfortable gap in American air power. The war forced the Pentagon to admit what it had previously rejected. American forces lacked a light, armed observation aircraft. The Cessna O-1 Bird Dog was slow, fragile, and only lightly armed. The twin-engine O-2 Skymaster, introduced later, would also fail to completely satisfy the growing demand for reconnaissance, target designation, and immediate fire support. Those aircraft could locate a target and call in strike aircraft, but they remained dangerously vulnerable. Their crews operated at low altitude, where even small arms fire presented a serious threat. When troops below came under attack, an observer often had no choice but to transmit coordinates and wait for heavier aircraft to arrive. This concerns the widening gap between a light observation aircraft and a fast jet attack aircraft. The first could examine the battlefield, but had little ability to protect itself or friendly troops. The second carried tremendous firepower, yet crossed the target area so quickly that its crew might not fully understand what was happening below. Under pressure from the war, former opponents of the concept began changing their position. The Navy, which had initially resisted the proposal from Beckett and Rice, finally accepted the need for a new aircraft. The Air Force reached the same conclusion as its demand for battlefield observation and forward air control continued to grow. The Pentagon announced the LARA competition, Light Armed Reconnaissance Aircraft. Its requirements attempted to combine the demands of several branches of the armed forces. The aircraft had to observe the battlefield, mark targets, support ground units, carry a limited payload, and operate from short and unprepared airstrips. This concerns the moment when a garage-built concept received its first official opportunity. 11 manufacturers entered the competition. Beckett and Rice were no longer arguing only with skeptical commanders. Their idea now had to defeat proposals from major aviation companies with large engineering departments, test facilities, and production lines. The contract was ultimately awarded to North American Aviation. For Beckett, it was a personal victory. The concept for which he had left the Marine Corps was no longer merely a fiberglass mock-up. The project received the designation YOV-10A and authorization to become a genuine flying prototype. But the Pentagon had no intention of accepting the original aircraft without major changes. Each military service demanded additional equipment, structural reinforcement, and weapons. The simple, forward-deployed machine began accumulating weight, systems, and new operational restrictions. The design proposed by Beckett and Rice had a wingspan of approximately 20 feet, or just over 6 meters. The military demanded a 40-foot wing, slightly more than 12 meters. Its span doubled, threatening the original ability to operate from confined clearings close to ground troops. This concerns the first major compromise. A longer wing provided more lift and allowed the aircraft to carry additional equipment and weapons. At the same time, it made the aircraft larger, heavier, and increasingly different from the compact battlefield machine envisioned by its creators. The military then demanded ejection seats. The cockpit had to receive a complete package of flight and navigation instruments. 7 external hardpoints were added for rockets, bombs, gun pods, and auxiliary fuel tanks. The Navy imposed another difficult condition. The landing gear had to survive operations from unprepared airfields while meeting the service's demanding structural standards. That component alone added approximately 1,000 pounds, or more than 450 kilograms, to the airframe. This concerns only one major addition. The required electronics added another 1,000 pounds. Those two groups of changes increased the aircraft's weight by roughly 2,000 pounds, more than 900 kilograms, before all requirements and testing had even been completed. Every addition could be defended individually. Ejection seats increased the crew's chance of escaping a damaged aircraft. Stronger landing gear permitted operations from poor airfields. Advanced electronics improved navigation, and 7 hardpoints turned the Observer into a heavily armed combat platform. But all those reasonable demands were beginning to destroy the original concept. The small aircraft became larger. The inexpensive machine became more costly. The simple design became complicated, and the forward-deployed aircraft began moving toward dependence on specialized maintenance and equipment. Beckett and Rice had achieved their first great objective. The Pentagon finally recognized the need for their aircraft. But official approval came at a brutal price. One after another, the principles that had defined the original concept — small size, simplicity, low cost, deployment beside ground troops, and operation from ordinary roads — were quietly pushed aside. By July 16, 1965, little remained of the tiny aircraft originally conceived in a California garage. On that day, the OV-10A prototype made its first flight. The machine was almost twice the size and weight of the design proposed 4 years earlier by Beckett and Rice. The changes could not be concealed behind a new military designation. The wing had been enlarged, the landing gear strengthened, the cockpit filled with instruments and ejection seats, and external weapon stations added beneath the aircraft. The Pentagon was no longer testing an extremely simple forward-deployed airplane, but a complete military platform built around the remains of the original idea. This concerns the first serious test of the entire project. Every additional requirement had appeared reasonable on paper, but now the heavier machine had to prove that it could preserve the qualities that justified its existence. It still had to fly well at low speed, maneuver over a confined area, operate from short airfields, and allow its crew to examine the ground below. The first flights provided grounds for cautious optimism. Despite its increased dimensions and weight, the OV-10A remained stable, controllable, and suitable for low-altitude observation. Norton Rice admitted that the aircraft had changed considerably, but insisted that it was still recognizable. Rice believed the prototype continued to demonstrate great potential. Yet North Americans' victory in the LARA competition did not mean the argument was permanently settled. The OV-10A had a dangerous rival, and in several areas, that rival appeared to be the stronger aircraft. This concerns the Convair Model 48 Charger. Convair had competed for the LARA contract and lost, but its management refused to accept the Pentagon's decision as final. The company used its own money to construct a flying prototype and attempted to prove that North American had won with an inferior design. The Model 48 Charger was intended for the same light-armed reconnaissance mission. It used a twin-boom configuration, 2 turboprop engines, and a cockpit designed to provide excellent visibility. Its broad similarity to the future Bronco was impossible to miss, although the two aircraft employed different structural and engineering solutions. When flight testing began, North American faced a genuine threat. The Charger outperformed the YOV-10A in several categories. Convair now had evidence that could encourage the Pentagon to reconsider its decision, reduce North American's order, or demand another full comparison between the two aircraft. This concerns the period when the future of the Bronco was still far from secure. North American held the contract, but government contracts could be changed and production plans reduced. A successful, privately funded competitor still had the potential to overturn years of work by Beckett and Rice. The decisive moment came in October 1965. During its 196th test flight, the only Model 48 Charger prototype crashed and was completely destroyed. Convair's program instantly lost its only flying aircraft. The company could have constructed another prototype, but doing so required additional money, time, and a willingness to continue without a government order. The program never recovered its previous momentum. The YOV-10A's most serious technical rival disappeared from the competition. This concerns more than a simple claim that North American had designed the superior aircraft. The Charger had produced strong results and had genuinely surpassed its opponent in several areas. But an aviation competition is decided not only by projected performance. The aircraft must continue flying, complete testing, and be ready for production on schedule. The path toward production was now open, but the YOV-10A still required significant corrections. During one test, a weapon failed to separate safely from one of the short structures beneath the central fuselage. Those structures, which would become the Bronco's characteristic sponsons, had to be redesigned to keep released weapons clear of the aircraft. Engineers refined the aerodynamics, modified individual components, and repeatedly tested the weapons system. Military crews evaluated the aircraft at low speed, on primitive airfields, and under conditions intended to reproduce future combat operations. Each flight moved the prototype closer to the configuration that would soon become famous. After the principal corrections were completed, the aircraft entered production as the OV-10 Bronco. By August 1967, the first production machines were leaving the North American assembly line. The strange garage proposal had officially become an American military aircraft. This concerns the moment Beckett and Rice had pursued from the beginning. The Pentagon had not received a supersonic fighter or a conventional heavy attack aircraft, but a slow twin-boom machine with an enormous transparent canopy. Its value would now be decided not by senior commanders, engineers, or competition committees, but by an actual war. The wait was short. The United States was expanding its air presence in Vietnam, where ground forces required reconnaissance, target designation, and immediate fire support. The Bronco was being sent into the exact jungle environment for which its creators had demanded a simple, rugged, and heavily armed aircraft. In the summer of 1968, the first 6 Marine Corps OV-10As arrived at Da Nang. Only 3 years had passed between the prototype's first flight and its deployment to war. The aircraft, born from a dispute between 2 majors and the Pentagon, had finally reached the battlefield, where that dispute would receive its answer. Several weeks after the Marine Corps aircraft arrived, United States Air Force OV-10As followed them into Vietnam. On July 31, 1968, the Air Force officially began Operation Combat Bronco. The Pentagon intended to discover whether the strange turboprop could survive over a real battlefield, or be eliminated within its first weeks of combat. The Bronco did not arrive as a fully proven combat aircraft. It entered Vietnam as an experiment that still had to justify its existence. The new machine was assigned one of the most difficult and dangerous jobs in tactical aviation: forward air control. This concerns the work of an airborne scout operating ahead of the main force. The crew had to locate the enemy, establish its exact position, distinguish hostile units from friendly troops, and call in more powerful aircraft. An error of only a short distance could send rockets and bombs toward the wrong position. A forward air controller could not simply notice suspicious movement and immediately order an attack. The target had to be examined, checked against friendly positions, reported to ground commanders, and clearly marked. The crew then remained overhead, controlled the strike, assessed the result, and requested another attack if necessary. At first glance, the United States already possessed enough aircraft for this mission. Jet fighters had tremendous speed, heavy weapons, and the ability to operate in areas where dense air defenses threatened light aircraft. Yet over the Vietnamese jungle, their greatest advantage could suddenly become a serious weakness. This concerns speed. A jet crossed the target area so rapidly that the terrain below became a blurred green surface. By the time the pilot detected a possible target, established its location, and returned for another pass, the people and vehicles below could disappear beneath the trees. At the opposite extreme were light observation aircraft, such as the Cessna 01 Bird Dog. They could circle slowly and allow the pilot to examine the ground carefully. But the 01 lacked the speed, protection, and firepower required when enemy troops began shooting from below. The fast jet could not remain long enough to study small details. The slow and lightly armed observer could not arrive quickly or provide substantial fire support. The Bronco occupied the narrow space between those two extremes. This concerns the central advantage of the OV-10A. It was faster than the light Cessnas, but considerably slower than a jet fighter. It could reach a threatened area quickly, reduce speed, and remain over the same terrain for hours. Its two crew members sat in tandem. The forward pilot flew the aircraft, while the rear observer watched the ground, operated the radios, and helped coordinate attacks. Full controls in the rear cockpit allowed either crew member to fly the aircraft if circumstances demanded it. The enormous transparent canopy, once mocked by supporters of sleek jet fighters, became the Bronco's most important working instrument. It was wider than the central fuselage and provided an expansive view forward, downward, and to both sides. The crew did not observe the battlefield through a few narrow windows. They seemed to sit inside a glass enclosure. This concerns the Bronco's normal operating altitude over Vietnam. Forward air controllers frequently flew between 1,000 and 1,500 feet, approximately 300 to 460 meters. From that height, they could distinguish roads, boats, carts, people, vehicle tracks, and changes in the normal activity around villages. The crews did not limit themselves to searching for visible armed groups. They learned where farmers usually worked, which roads local residents used, and when boats normally appeared on the rivers. After several days of continuous observation, isolated details began forming recognizable patterns. Marine Corps pilot Chuck Burren recalled asking a simple question. "There are no farmers in the field today. Why?" To an outsider, an empty field might have meant nothing. To an experienced crew, it could be a warning that local residents knew an attack, ambush, or military movement was approaching. This concerns intelligence based not only on instruments, but also on understanding the life unfolding below. A Bronco crew could return to the same area day after day and notice changes that no pilot could detect during a single high-speed pass. One unusual detail justified closer attention. Several connected details could reveal a larger operation. Those observations mattered far beyond the aircraft itself. Information gathered by the crew was passed to ground forces and senior commanders. An empty field, unusual boat traffic, or the sudden disappearance of people from a road could influence the decision to launch or cancel an operation. But the Bronco was more than an airborne observation post. 4 7.62mm machine guns were mounted inside the aircraft's side sponsons. External stations allowed it to carry rocket pods and additional weapons. This concerns another major difference between the OV-10A and earlier observation aircraft. After locating the enemy, the Bronco crew did not always have to wait for jet attack aircraft. It could mark the target with rockets, suppress a firing position, or protect ground troops until heavier support arrived. Marine Corps pilot Dennis Darnell explained, "You could do a considerable amount of damage while waiting for the heavier weapons." He then added the more provocative point: when the situation allowed, the heavier aircraft might not be needed at all. For a light reconnaissance airplane, that was an extraordinary capability. The Pentagon had requested an observer, but the aircraft sent to Vietnam could locate the enemy, direct strike aircraft, and enter the fight on its own. It did not have the speed of a jet fighter and could not replace a heavy attack aircraft. Yet the operational gap between those two extremes was exactly where the Bronco proved most useful. On July 31, 1968, no one could guarantee that the concept would survive the test of war. Military officials monitored every mission, every instance of damage, and every attack result. The Bronco entered Vietnam as an experiment. But within several weeks, it stopped being merely an aircraft under evaluation. Ground troops began recognizing its twin-boom silhouette and the sound of its 2 turboprop engines. Enemy units learned to fear a machine that could circle the same area for hours, while friendly forces increasingly asked for it by name. On January 3, 1969, the United States Navy established a new unit during a ceremony at Naval Air Station North Island in California. It was Light Attack Squadron 4, officially designated VAL-4. Its pilots adopted a name that would soon become famous in the Mekong Delta: the Black Ponies. This concerns far more than a dramatic squadron name or a colorful insignia. VAL-4 had been created for a specific mission in one of the most difficult regions of South Vietnam. Its battlefield would be the Mekong Delta. War in the Delta looked nothing like the clean lines drawn on military maps. Rivers, narrow canals, swamps, and countless waterways crossed the region. Roads were limited, which meant that soldiers, supplies, and weapons often moved by boat. American and South Vietnamese river forces patrolled those waterways. Patrol boats inspected canals, escorted convoys, searched for concealed enemy craft, and inserted troops along the banks. Navy SEAL teams also operated in the region, conducting reconnaissance, raids, and other missions close to enemy positions. This concerns a battlefield where hostile forces could appear only a short distance away and disappear into vegetation minutes later. Fire came from riverbanks, villages, concealed bunkers, and narrow channels. The river units needed aircraft that could arrive quickly, identify friendly positions, and attack without a long delay. Helicopters already supported those forces, but they could not satisfy every demand. They were slower, had limited endurance over distant areas, and remained vulnerable to concentrated fire from the ground. Jet aircraft had the opposite problem. They crossed the complicated network of rivers and canals too quickly. A major operational gap remained between the helicopter and the jet fighter. The OV-10A Bronco was expected to occupy that gap. It could remain airborne longer, carry substantial weapons, operate at low altitude, and fly slowly enough for its crew to understand the situation below. This concerns the central mission of the Black Ponies. VAL-4 was intended to provide immediately available air support for patrol boats and Navy SEAL teams. Its aircraft would not wait for a large, carefully planned operation. They had to launch whenever river forces reported that they were under attack. The Black Ponies arrived in Vietnam in April 1969. The squadron operated from Binh Thuy Air Base in the Mekong Delta. Its crews initially flew OV-10As provided by the Marine Corps. The new unit appeared to have everything it needed: aircraft, trained crews, weapons, and a clearly defined mission. Then it encountered a problem that bordered on the absurd. Most of the river units it was supposed to protect did not know that the squadron existed. This concerns the rare case of a combat squadron without customers. Patrol boat commanders and teams ashore did not know how to request a Bronco, which radio frequencies to use, or what weapons the aircraft could deliver. The airplanes were ready, and the crews were waiting, yet emergency calls continued going to other aviation units. The Black Ponies refused to wait for the information to travel through the military bureaucracy. Their aircraft began flying over friendly posts, river bases, and patrol areas. During those flights, the crews transmitted a prepared announcement over the radio. The message listed the capabilities of the OV-10A, available weapons, operating frequencies, and the correct procedure for requesting support. The crews even provided the telephone number of the Navy Operations Center controlling their missions. A combat squadron was effectively advertising its services over an active war zone. This concerns initiative rather than publicity. If a patrol boat commander did not know the correct radio frequency, the aircraft would never receive the call. If a SEAL team did not understand what the Bronco could do, it might request less suitable support or receive no immediate assistance at all. The unusual campaign produced results quickly. Information about the Black Ponies spread among patrol boat commanders, shore positions, and special operations units. After the first successful missions, requests for the Bronco increased rapidly. The aircraft did more than observe the battlefield and transmit coordinates. Its crew could remain overhead, follow enemy movements, and use its own weapons without waiting for a separate strike formation. The willingness of the pilots to operate low over rivers and hostile banks meant they could see almost the same battlefield as the men aboard the boats. This concerns trust that no headquarters order could create. River forces had to learn that the aircraft would arrive quickly, identify their position correctly, and avoid attacking friendly troops. Every accurate strike brought another request, while every protected patrol boat spread the Black Ponies' reputation across the radio network. The squadron that had arrived in Vietnam searching for customers soon became an essential source of air support in the Delta. Long endurance, heavy armament for such a small aircraft, and a willingness to fly low made the Bronco something unique in the Mekong Delta. The Pentagon designed the Bronco as a light reconnaissance aircraft and forward air controller. The Black Ponies turned it into a genuine attack aircraft. Their crews did not merely locate the enemy and request assistance. They delivered rockets and cannon fire themselves. A standard pair of OV-10As carried 8 5-inch Zuni rockets, each measuring 127 millimeters in diameter. They also carried pods of 2.75-inch rockets, approximately 70 millimeters. Depending on the mission, the aircraft received either a 20-millimeter gun pod or additional rocket pods. This concerns a level of firepower rarely associated with a small observation aircraft. A pair of Broncos could locate an enemy position, launch its own attack, and continue circling overhead. The aircraft did not have to disappear after the first pass because it lacked fuel or useful weapons. The Zuni rapidly became the preferred weapon of the Black Ponies. It was accurate for an unguided rocket, carried a powerful warhead, and could strike fortified positions, boats, and firing points along the riverbank. For enemy troops, the appearance of two small Broncos could bring an attack completely out of proportion to the aircraft's modest size. The Zuni was especially impressive at night. Pilot Daniel Sheehan described its flight as a spectacular trail of fire. The launch tore through the darkness with a blinding streak that briefly illuminated the cockpit and the terrain below. This concerns more than a dramatic visual effect. The flash could temporarily damage the pilot's night vision, while another attack pass and low-altitude flight still lay ahead. Crews developed a simple battlefield solution. They closed one eye immediately before launching the rocket. The open eye absorbed the brilliant flash. After the rocket left the aircraft, the pilot opened the protected eye and could still distinguish the river, trees, lights, and friendly boats below. No training manual had taught them the technique. The war itself had provided the lesson. The Black Ponies had to remain ready to launch at any hour. An ambush against a patrol boat did not wait for the airfield's schedule. A SEAL team under fire at night could not remain in position while an air crew slowly completed every conventional procedure. This concerns combat readiness measured in minutes. After receiving a call, the pilot in the forward cockpit climbed aboard, started the left engine, and completed as much of the checklist as possible. While the first propeller was already turning, the rear crew member received coordinates, radio frequencies, call signs, and friendly troop positions from the duty officer. The right engine was then started. The crew checked the weapons, established communications, and moved immediately toward takeoff. Several procedures were completed at the same time because performing them in the usual sequence could cost the men on the river critical minutes. During daylight, the normal interval between an alert and takeoff was 6 to 8 minutes. At night, the process required 10 to 15 minutes because the crew had to prepare in darkness, confirm the situation, and check the weapons. On one occasion at Bin Tui, the Black Ponies became airborne in only 3 minutes. This concerns an actual emergency response, not a demonstration prepared for visiting commanders. The aircraft had to move at that speed because river units were already fighting. During an ordinary engine start, the situation on the bank could change completely and a patrol boat could sustain severe damage. On the busiest nights, pilots and observers did not return to their quarters. They slept beneath the wings of their OV-10As, only a few steps from the cockpits. The distance between a sleeping crewman and his aircraft could determine how quickly help reached the men waiting on the river. Rest came in short and interrupted periods. At any moment, the crew could hear the alarm, rise from the ground, climb into the aircraft, and be flying over the dark delta minutes later. There was often no prepared route because the target coordinates arrived only as the engines were being started. This concerns a mission for which no complete doctrine existed. The Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps had never used the Bronco in exactly this manner. Official plans treated it primarily as a reconnaissance aircraft and forward air controller, not as an independent light attack platform. Air Force and Marine Corps OV-10s generally located targets, coordinated artillery fire, and directed heavier strike aircraft. The Black Ponies operated differently. They arrived first, attacked with their own weapons, and remained overhead until the immediate threat to the river forces had been reduced. There were few established procedures for attacking along narrow waterways, dividing responsibilities between the crew, or coordinating with patrol boats close to the target. The air crews tested different approaches during combat, remembered what worked, and passed those lessons to other pilots. Every mission became both an operation and a tactical experiment. This concerns tactics that could not be delivered with the aircraft from the factory. The crews determined the best altitude for firing Zunis, the safest direction for attacking a canal, and the correct way to avoid fire from the opposite bank. They also learned to communicate with friendly forces positioned only a short distance from the target. They turned the Bronco's low speed into an advantage. The aircraft could attack, turn over the river, confirm the location of friendly troops, and approach again from another direction. A jet fighter would already be miles away, while the Bronco continued watching the same section of the battlefield. The Pentagon provided the Black Ponies with an aircraft, but it did not provide a finished method for using it. The crews transformed an observation platform into a weapon of continuous close support. Daniel Sheehan later stated it without hesitation, "We wrote the close air support tactics for the OV-10. Within weeks, the Black Ponies became the most requested air support unit in the Mekong Delta. Patrol boat commanders and SEAL teams called them first when a mission collapsed into a firefight. But flying slowly and low over enemy positions carried a brutal price. On May 25, 1969, 2 OV-10As were patrolling near the Kua Lon River. 2 Navy patrol boats came under Viet Cong fire and requested assistance. The lead aircraft, Black Pony 107, carried Lieutenant Pete Russell in front and Lieutenant Junior Grade Jeff Johnson in the rear cockpit. This concerns a pilot with unusual combat experience. Russell had previously flown the piston-powered A-1 Sky Raider and had been one of 4 pilots involved in an air battle against North Vietnamese MiGs. He preferred propeller aircraft to jets and had deliberately volunteered for the Black Ponies. The 2 Broncos immediately attacked the positions along the river. They fired rockets first, then began strafing with their 7.62mm machine guns. During one diving attack, a single bullet passed through the only small section of the canopy not covered by armored glass and struck Russell in the head. Johnson had leaned forward for a better view when fragments of plexiglass hit his face. He grabbed the control stick, but it moved without resistance. The Bronco was diving at a 30-degree angle and 240 knots, approximately 445 kilometers per hour. This concerns a feature built into the aircraft from the beginning. The rear cockpit contained a complete set of flight controls. Johnson pulled the stick back, and the Bronco responded. The aircraft recovered only 35 feet, roughly 11 meters above the water. It passed barely above the masts of the patrol boats before Johnson turned toward Bin Tui at full speed. Only after landing did he learn that Russell had not survived the hit. Johnson later recalled, "For the Black Ponies, it was a wake-up call. I think everyone now understood that this was serious business." By 1971, the air war over Vietnam had entered a new technological phase. Observation alone was no longer enough. American aircraft had to locate small targets at night and destroy them with the first strike. The slow Bronco unexpectedly became part of a precision-guided weapons system. 15 OV-10As from the 23rd Tactical Air Support Squadron at Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, were secretly modified under the Pave Nail program. They received Loran navigation equipment and laser target designation systems. Their mission was to intercept troops, trucks, and supplies moving south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This concerns a fundamental change in the Bronco's role. Previously, its crew located the enemy, marked the position with a smoke rocket, and summoned strike aircraft. Now the rear observer could hold a laser beam on the target and guide a bomb directly toward it. After identifying a target, the OV-10 pilot entered a steady left-hand orbit. The crew member in the rear cockpit kept the laser designator aimed at a truck, storage area, or enemy position. High above the Bronco, an F-4 Phantom released a guided bomb and quickly left the threatened area. The bomb did not simply fall toward approximate coordinates. Its seeker detected the reflected laser energy and corrected its flight until impact. The small turboprop was effectively turning a heavy supersonic F-4 into an instrument for precision attack. This concerns an almost perfect division of responsibilities. The Bronco could remain overhead, observe the target, and prevent it from disappearing beneath the jungle. The Phantom contributed speed, a powerful weapon, and the ability to leave the engagement area rapidly. Enemy troops soon understood the meaning of the OV-10's distinctive left turn. Aviation historian Gerald Whitcomb, who flew such missions, explained, "If they saw an OV-10 enter the standard left-hand orbit, they had better stop firing, because a laser-guided bomb was coming." A routine maneuver became a warning powerful enough to make gun crews abandon their weapons and seek cover. But the technological race worked in both directions. North Vietnamese forces received Soviet SA-7 heat-seeking missiles. The weapon needed a hot engine exhaust, and the slowly circling Bronco offered an almost ideal target. The OV-10's greatest advantage was now turning against it. Low speed allowed the crew to observe carefully and keep the laser on target, but it also left the aircraft inside the threat area for too long. The quality that made the Bronco indispensable was becoming its most dangerous vulnerability. On June 29, 1972, Captain Stephen Bennett was flying near Quang Tri. Marine Corps observer Captain Mike Brown occupied the rear cockpit of the OV-10. For 3 hours, they directed naval gunfire, called in airstrikes, and watched the battlefield below. Then, an urgent request arrived. A small South Vietnamese unit had been trapped against the coast by a much larger North Vietnamese force. No friendly fighters remained nearby, and naval gunfire risked striking the soldiers it was supposed to protect. This concerns a situation with no safe solution. Bennett descended and attacked the advancing troops with the Bronco's 4 machine guns. Those weapons were intended mainly for target marking and self-defense, but now they had to stop an entire ground assault. One pass, then a second, then a third. Enemy troops began falling back, but Bennett continued the attack. During his 5th pass, an SA-7 missile rose from behind and struck the left engine. The explosion started a fire, damaged the landing gear, and sent fragments through both canopies. The crew now had only minutes to act. This concerns the choice that followed. Bennett could eject, but fragments had shredded Brown's parachute. If the pilot abandoned the aircraft, the observer would remain inside the burning Bronco. The pilot of an accompanying OV-10 urged Bennett to save himself. The damaged wing could fail at any moment. Bennett refused to leave Brown behind. Only one option remained: a landing on the Gulf of Tonkin. Previous attempts to ditch an OV-10 had ended disastrously because the cockpit broke apart on impact. Bennett knew the record and turned toward the sea anyway. When the aircraft touched the water, its damaged extended landing gear dug beneath the surface. The Bronco spun violently, overturned, and plunged nose first into the sea. Brown escaped, but Bennett remained trapped inside the wreckage. He was recovered the following day for refusing to abandon his crewmate and for attacking to protect the surrounded unit. Stephen Bennett received the Medal of Honor after his loss. He became the only OV-10 pilot ever awarded the highest American military decoration. In January 1973, the ceasefire agreement ended direct American participation in the Vietnam War. The Black Ponies had already been disbanded in April of the previous year. It appeared that an aircraft created for the jungle would now disappear into storage. But the Bronco refused to vanish. The Air Force continued operating it for almost 2 more decades. Retired OV-10s also began receiving missions that Beckett and Rice could never have imagined inside their California garage. This concerns the fight against wildfires. The United States Bureau of Land Management acquired 7 OV-10As and used them as airborne lead aircraft. They flew ahead of heavy air tankers, selected safe routes through smoke, and indicated where water or fire retardant should be released. The crews used the Bronco's existing smoke system to mark the correct flight path. The smaller aircraft then moved aside as the tanker approached. Inside a smoke-filled canyon, the OV-10's panoramic visibility once again became a critical advantage. The California Department of Forestry later assumed the mission and operated its own Bronco fleet. Crews coordinated entire aerial firefighting operations from the aircraft's greenhouse canopy. The same view, once used to locate enemy troops, now helped them detect the advancing edge of a wildfire. This concerns the unusual transformation of a combat aircraft into a life-saving tool. Low speed, long endurance, and excellent visibility remained essential. Only the enemy had changed. The crews were now tracking fire instead of concealed military units. The State Department found another use for the Bronco in South America. The aircraft participated in counter-narcotics missions and coca eradication operations. It could patrol above the Andes for hours, work far from major bases, and operate from primitive airstrips. NASA acquired several OV-10s for research. Engineers studied low-speed flight, controllability, and the aircraft's unusual twin-boom design. The machine, once rejected for being too slow, was now valuable precisely because of its low-speed performance. This concerns more than the end of the Bronco's military career. Engineers continued searching for ways to return it to combat with modern capabilities. Their work produced the OV-10D, immediately recognizable by its extended nose. The new nose contained a forward-looking infrared sensor and laser target designator. Upgraded engines and sensors allowed the aircraft to locate targets at night and illuminate them for guided weapons. Modified exhaust systems reduced infrared emissions and made heat-seeking missiles less likely to lock on. The Vietnam-era workhorse was becoming a genuine night attack platform. It retained its long endurance and panoramic view, but gained technology unavailable to its original crews. Extended exhausts further reduced its infrared signature. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein's army invaded Kuwait. The United States began assembling the largest international military coalition since the Second World War. Modern fighters, strategic bombers, and attack helicopters were ordered toward the Persian Gulf. But one of the mobilized units still operated aircraft from the Vietnam era. The VMO-2 was one of the Marine Corps' final 2 observation squadrons equipped with the OV-10 Bronco. The small turboprop was being sent into another war, this time against far more advanced air defenses. This concerns an aircraft whose first prototype had flown in 1965. By the beginning of the Gulf crisis, the Bronco was already considered a veteran. The Marine Corps, however, had no intention of leaving it on an American airfield. 6 VMO-2 Broncos were ordered to deploy to the Middle East under their own power. They departed Cherry Point, North Carolina, crossed the Atlantic, continued through Europe, and headed toward the Persian Gulf. The complete journey covered approximately 10,000 miles, or 16,000 kilometers. For a large jet aircraft, such a deployment was difficult but familiar. For a small Bronco designed to operate close to the front, it appeared almost unbelievable. The journey required repeated landings, refueling stops, inspections, and precise planning for every stage. This concerns an operational deployment, not a publicity flight. After arrival, the crews had to prepare for combat immediately. A serious mechanical failure over the Atlantic or far from a support base could end the mission before the aircraft ever encountered the enemy. All 6 aging aircraft completed the journey. Their 10,000-mile flight appeared in aviation publications around the world. The Bronco had not yet flown a combat mission in the new war, but it had already demonstrated that age did not mean helplessness. The other remaining squadron, VMO-1, followed a different route. Its OV-10s were loaded aboard USS America and USS Theodore Roosevelt. The enormous carriers transported the small aircraft across the ocean with the main aviation force. Two squadrons were approaching the same war by different routes. Some Broncos crossed the ocean on aircraft carrier decks, while 6 flew the entire distance under their own power. Ahead waited the airspace of Kuwait and Iraq, where the endurance of the old aircraft would face another test. Operation Desert Storm began in January 1991. Marine Corps OV-10s remained almost continuously over the combat zone. They conducted reconnaissance, coordinated airstrikes, and directed artillery fire. The Broncos also worked with naval gunfire. Their crews helped control fire from American warships, including the first combat salvo fired by USS Wisconsin since the Korean War. Once again, the small aircraft served as the eyes of a far more powerful weapon. This concerns the mission that had led Beckett and Rice to challenge the Pentagon. The Bronco was never supposed to be the fastest aircraft or carry the largest bomb. It was supposed to see the battlefield more clearly and remain overhead longer. The critical test came on the night of February 23rd, immediately before the ground offensive. The 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions had entered Kuwait and were clearing routes through Iraqi minefields. An OV-10D circled above them. Captain Kevin Tribe occupied the rear cockpit. With infrared equipment and continuous observation, he possessed a more complete picture than the units below. In the darkness, an inexperienced battalion advanced rapidly and requested an airstrike. This concerns the moment when American aircraft could have attacked American Marines. Tribe detected the error, compared the unit positions, and intervened before weapons were released. The potential disaster was prevented, not by the Bronco's speed or firepower, but by its crew's ability to understand the entire battlefield. The same campaign also exposed the aircraft's limits. Later, 2 OV-10As were struck by Iraqi surface-to-air missiles. Both were early models without infrared flares that might have diverted missiles away from their hot engines. During the operation, Iraqi air defense crews locked on to Marine Broncos 94 times. Every lock meant that the aircraft could be only seconds away from a missile launch. The slow machine remained inside the threat zone for too long. This concerns the brutal reversal at the center of the Bronco concept. Low speed allowed its crew to detect mistakes, locate targets, and remain beside ground forces. Against modern air defenses, the same quality made the aircraft an inviting target. The low and slow tactics that had succeeded over the Mekong Delta could no longer guarantee survival. By the mid-1990s, the Bronco's tasks were being transferred to ground controllers, fast jets, and newer surveillance systems. In 1995, the Marine Corps retired the OV-10 and disbanded its remaining observation squadrons. For almost 3 decades, the Bronco had served over jungles, rivers, and deserts. There was no dramatic announcement that an irreplaceable aircraft was leaving. It was quietly withdrawn from service. The Pentagon retired the Bronco, but a rare capability disappeared with it. Its mission was divided among several participants. Ground units received laser designators, while fast jets were expected to arrive on request and deliver guided weapons. On paper, the new system appeared modern and efficient. A soldier located the target, transmitted coordinates, and waited for a fighter to enter the area, attack, and leave. But a fast jet could not spend hours studying the same road, river, or group of buildings. This concerns the mission once performed by a single aircraft. The Bronco could locate a target, verify it, communicate with troops, mark the position, and attack if necessary. After its retirement, those functions had to be divided among ground teams, command centers, surveillance systems, and strike aircraft. Concern began spreading inside the military community. Articles in the Marine Corps Gazette warned that no aircraft remaining in service could fully perform the OV-10's work. The Air Force also began questioning whether an important combat capability had disappeared with the old machine. This concerns more than nostalgia for a Vietnam veteran. Limited wars continued, and troops still needed an inexpensive platform that could remain overhead and use weapons without summoning a heavy jet fighter. Employing advanced combat aircraft for every small target was enormously expensive. By 2009, Boeing had proposed the OV-10X. The old airframe would receive a digital cockpit with multifunction displays, modern communications, and advanced sensors. It would also carry guided rockets and precision weapons. The OV-10X preserved the Bronco's central qualities: long endurance, low-speed operation, and use of short airfields. At the same time, its crew would receive night sensors, precise navigation, and modern target detection systems. A design from the 1960s could return in digital form. This concerns a proposal the Pentagon seriously examined but never adopted. The OV-10X did not enter production, yet official interest in the concept revealed that the Bronco had left a genuine gap in American aviation. In 2012, the military moved from discussion to a quiet experiment. It acquired two aging OV-10s, one previously operated by NASA and the other by the State Department. No public announcement declared that the veterans were returning. This concerns a test of a nearly 50-year-old design under modern conditions. The aircraft received new equipment and weapons before undergoing operational evaluation. The military wanted to know whether the Bronco could provide something unavailable from faster and more expensive aircraft. The testing continued without publicity. The old machines were prepared for missions that officials barely acknowledged. By May 2015, the United States military had its answer. In 2015, two modernized OV-10 Broncos were secretly sent to the Middle East. They joined Operation Inherent Resolve against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The nearly 50-year-old aircraft was returning to war under the classified Combat Dragon 2 program. There was no ceremonial announcement. The military issued no press release and did not reveal where the aircraft were based. Two aging Broncos simply appeared in the combat zone and began working. This concerns far more than a demonstration at a protected test range. During 82 days, the crews completed more than 120 combat missions. Most were flown in support of Special Operations Forces. The veterans received the same kind of assignment for which the aircraft had been created in the 1960s. They had to observe an area for long periods, separate a genuine target from ordinary movement, and deliver a precise attack near friendly forces. But the Bronco now carried weapons unavailable to Vietnam-era crews. This concerns its 2.75-inch rockets, approximately 70 millimeters in diameter. In Vietnam, they had been unguided weapons following a ballistic path. Modern laser guidance kits now allowed them to strike small targets with accuracy measured in inches. One operation over the Tigris River demonstrated why the military had brought the retired aircraft back. The crew located two small boats carrying ISIS fighters and weapons toward the front line. The Bronco did not attack immediately. It climbed, reduced engine power, and began watching. For 3 hours, the crew followed the boats, checked their route, examined the riverbanks, and monitored nearby traffic. A fast jet might have exhausted its fuel or transferred the target, but the Bronco continued waiting. This concerns the principle Beckett and Rice had defended from the beginning: remain with the target long enough to understand it. The crew did not rush to produce a dramatic strike. It waited until the boats were isolated and the danger to others was minimal. 3 hours of surveillance ended in 90 seconds. The Bronco entered the attack and fired 2 volleys of laser-guided rockets. Both boats were hit. The crew did not remain over the wreckage. It immediately exited the attack, scanned for threats, and prepared for another pass. A third boat was approximately 500 yards, or 457 meters, farther upriver. Over the Mekong, Broncos had hunted boats carrying supplies for the Viet Cong. Decades later, the aircraft was performing almost the same mission over the Tigris, but its old rockets now followed laser guidance. The enemy had changed, the technology had changed, and the mission remained. A later mission report contained an extraordinary detail. The attack against the ISIS boats occurred exactly 47 years after the OV-10 Bronco's first combat mission in Vietnam. The aircraft had returned to a familiar kind of river, but the Mekong had become the Tigris, and unguided rockets now followed a laser. Combat Dragon 2 was considered successful. In 82 days, 2 aircraft completed more than 120 missions and proved that an old platform could employ modern precision weapons. Yet the Bronco did not return to permanent service. This concerns organization and cost rather than combat performance. An Air Force representative explained that operating another aircraft type required separate training, spare parts, maintenance personnel, and support infrastructure. Those expenses were judged too high for a fleet of only 2 machines. The military rejected the Bronco again, despite the results. But its story continued far from classified operations. At Chino Airport in California, a restoration team was returning 2 former Black Ponies OV-10As to flying condition. One aircraft carried Bureau number 155,474. Former VAL-4 pilot Harry Nisser had named it White Lightning in Vietnam. He completed 162 combat missions in that aircraft. This concerns far more than a static museum exhibit. White Lightning had supported patrol boats, SEAL teams, and ground forces in the Mekong Delta. The restoration team intended not merely to repaint it, but to return it to the sky. The work required a year and a half. Specialists restored engines, wiring, flight controls, and systems that had remained inactive for decades. Every component had to withstand an actual flight rather than a museum inspection. In July 2019, White Lightning lifted from the runway for the first time in decades. An aircraft repeatedly declared obsolete was airborne again. For the Bronco, another return seemed almost inevitable. In the early 1960s, officials rejected it for being too slow, simple, and strange. In 1995, it was retired for being too vulnerable to modern air defenses. In 2015, it returned to combat and struck ISIS targets with precision-guided rockets. This concerns the paradox at the center of its history. The Bronco was never the fastest, heaviest, or most technologically complicated aircraft. Yet wars continued demanding a machine that could observe patiently, understand the battlefield, and immediately support troops below. The Pentagon changed doctrines, weapons, and generations of aircraft. Limited wars kept asking the same question: which aircraft could remain overhead long enough to see what truly mattered? The OV-10 Bronco remained one of the few with the right answer. If you found the story of the OV-10 Bronco interesting, support this video with a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next stories about legendary aircraft, forgotten projects, and the hidden history of military aviation. See you in the next episode.